Welcome to General Counselling, the podcast from Montresor Legal. General Counselling is the legal podcast where we bring together leaders from private practice together with the cream of in-house to share their insights on the latest issues across the legal landscape with you, our most valued network. Today is our second episode, so well done for finding us so early. Please do hit subscribe, or if you like what you hear, maybe leave us a glowing review. We'll be putting out a new episode bi-monthly, so follow us via the Montresor Legal LinkedIn page or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're covering an issue right at the top of the priority list for leaders, both within the legal profession and in particular, the businesses and clients that engage them, diversity and representation. So given the topic, I could not be more pleased with our two guests. From the in-house side, we have Tobi Rufus, Allen and Overy alumni, and currently an executive director and senior counsel at Goldman Sachs, and quite possibly the most well-networked lawyer in the world. Tobi literally seems to know everyone in the industry. From private practice, we're joined by Jat Bains. Jat is a finance partner and heads the restructuring and insolvency group at McFarlanes, which I would imagine in the current climate is keeping him reasonably well occupied. But he's also a partner champion of McFarlanes' Reach network, which provides a forum for networking and peer support between ethnic minority staff and allies. And in 2019 was recognized as a workplace hero at the Investing in Ethnicity Awards. For the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be getting their insight into some of the initiatives boosting underrepresented groups and their career development within the legal profession. So to kick things off, the challenge. Tobi, what objectives do you see there are in boosting underrepresented groups in law?
Well, firstly, thank you for that kind introduction, Tom. Looking at the objectives, so I think we firstly need to ask ourselves why diversity is important. Now, clearly there is a political argument around meritocracy and fairness and people being judged on their ability and not having barriers to entry. But there are also, from my perspective at least as in-house counsel, economic arguments. We as a firm like to be able to deliver results to our clients, and that means diversity of thought. And the way to ensure that we get diversity of thought is to have diversity of people. And therefore it's immensely important that when legal decisions are being made, transactions are being undertaken, litigation is being gone through, you've got this diversity of thought, because that allows us to have those different elements of thought come together to produce the best possible decision and the best possible outcome for us as a client, and also more generally for all parties involved. So I think the objective is to ensure that we've got a more diverse profession for those reasons. Now, what does that mean in respect of improving numbers? Well, the numbers pretty much speak for themselves. Across all of the different stratas of diversity, be it gender, sexual orientation, race, disability, the numbers are all pretty poor if you look at the city legal profession. And I think the objective there is to get those numbers up. And it's not just to get those numbers up from a recruitment training contract perspective, but over a period of time, is to get those numbers up in the upper echelons. One of the biggest issues that we seem to be facing as a profession is that people come in and are recruited, but the attrition rate is so high. So we need to ask ourselves, why is it so high in diverse individuals? And, you know, some of the things that we could look at are people being given the right opportunities? Has there been the right sponsorship? Has there been you know, the right flexible working available to people? You know, are people comfortable in explaining that they've got a disability and making people aware that, okay, they may be dyslexic, so they need the extra time and they might need some extra support? There's a lot of taboos that there seems to be around the place, and I think part of making a more diverse and inclusive workplace is losing those taboos and giving people the ability to ask for those concessions and ask for those things to be changed. So I think the objective really is to improve the numbers and to get the stats in the higher echelons and as well as the lower echelons and all across the industry. And I think to do that, there needs to be, as I say, sponsorship, there needs to be encouragement, there needs to be help, and there really needs to be a diverse and inclusive workplace.
Yeah, from the private practice side, what do you see as the objectives within a firm like McFarlanes to boost the numbers of underrepresented groups and, as Toby says, the development of their careers once they are in the industry?
I think Toby's covered quite a lot of it. I mean, I think it is important to start right at the beginning to make sure that we get a sufficiently high number of people in as graduates, and it's got to be, frankly, I think it's got to be disproportionate. If you're thinking about wanting to be representative at partner level, and let's say circa 10% of the country are ethnic minority, and that's what you're aiming for right at partner level. I mean, you have to account for a bit of attrition, and therefore firms need to be looking at getting in far more graduates than they traditionally have been, right as trainees, and then working through, not just stopping there, but then working through the entire career path. Inclusivity is vitally important, and allowing people to kind of perhaps show a little bit more of themselves in the workplace, I think is important. You sort of have that home persona, you have that work persona, but being able to kind of bring some of themselves in and share it gives people that greater confidence in themselves. I think that's really important. And Toby mentioned sponsorship. I think I'm not sure many people out there achieved any promotion without the help of somebody above them who helped them up and mentored them, but also spoke for them in the right conversations when career decisions are made, and much more of that needs to happen. And ultimately, I think what we're looking for over the very long term is for there to be a greater number of role models for people to look up to prove that it can be done. And unfortunately, there just is a lack of that, but it becomes a little bit chicken and egg. I think you have to start getting the processes right, and that's the end result.
Do you think, I mean, one of this has been an issue for a reasonably long time now, and I remember one of the things, not just in legal, but in finance and across the city, one of the issues is that the traditional recruiting grounds at graduate level, so Oxbridge, the Durhams, the Bristol, the top unis, historically struggled to have that level of representation in their student numbers, and that then fed through to what was happening in the employers. Have you seen much change over the last few years in that at graduate level?
I think I'm certainly seeing some efforts being made, both by universities and by other organisations. You look at the Target Oxbridge initiative from Rare Recruitment, for example, trying to help improve those numbers. I do think actually the onus should also be on firms to kind of look beyond the obvious, and to be trying to encourage the best applicants from non-Russell Group, non-traditional universities, because there'll be a heck of a lot of talent out there that just doesn't get recognised because people aren't looking, and partly because people aren't helping them understand some of the rules of the game. It's not that they don't necessarily get the same level of support that might be available at some of those other universities. And certainly, one of our initiatives that we're just in the process of kicking off this autumn actually is trying to team up with non-Russell Group universities, which are in perhaps some of the economically poorest bits of the country, and certainly trying to look beyond the doorsteps, not just in London and the southeast here, and encouraging those students to, and the best students there to come spend a bit of time with us. We'll help them understand what it's like in this sort of environment, help them understand the sorts of things they need to be thinking about for application purposes, and just offering those things that help level the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, and just to add on that from our perspective, our firm's been involved with Pathways to Law for a number of different years, along with the Sutton Trust, where we take 16-year-olds come in and they get the opportunity to see the Goldman Sachs legal department, go across the floor, and that's really around social mobility. I was a beneficiary myself of one of the Sutton Trust schemes, and that allows me to go up to Oxford for a week. I ended up doing my degree there. I'm now on the alumni board at my old college at Oxford, and a lot of the issues that we have is trying to get people to apply who are from non-traditional backgrounds. And so I think it's two-pronged, as you know, as Jatinder just said, it's about going out to the non-traditional universities, but it's also going out to the kids who are doing A-levels and say, you know, consider applying to these universities. I know you're not from a traditional background, but you've got as much right to apply as anybody else. And therefore those universities, you know, taking them on.
I think we had an intern from the Social Mobility Foundation who came from a background like that, and what struck me when he was with us was exactly that. Like if you meet someone from a good uni, most of them will have a whole network of people in their social life or their family life telling them what to do, and like just basically heaping not pressure on them so much, but just like expectation that that's the route they're going to take. And if you don't have that environment, which obviously most people from underrepresented groups aren't going to have, it sort of means that you're much less likely to just see it as a natural thing for you to do if you have that level of academic excellence or you're bright enough.
Yeah,
completely agree.
One of the things that struck me and is I guess is topical recently is related to COVID, which is the concern I have is if you look at the remote learning, if you look at what's happening at schools with A-level students having to take a reasonably large amount of time out, is that going to put even more pressure on the number of students that would then see themselves as going into the type of routes that would allow them to get into law because they've their education has been interrupted by the COVID crisis?
Well, Tom, as you say, it is quite topical. If you look, the vast majority of diverse students are going to be coming from state schools. And as we know, there has been a whole situation that we've had over the summer around people having their predicted grades for A-levels being based on what the school achieved rather than what the individual achieved. So that in itself means you're going to have people who are maybe missing out on their university places, missing out on their chances to take up those places. So as a result, that, in itself, and if you don't go to the non-traditional universities, you're going to have a whole generation that is going to be missed out because you're not going to be able to recruit for them because you've got this vicious cycle of COVID where their grades are just basically predictions which are calibrated based on what others before them got. And the reason why for a lot of them, the situation is going to be that their school is not the greatest school and others may not have achieved the greatest, but that doesn't necessarily mean those individuals who have places to go to the top universities would not have achieved that. So, I think that's going to be extremely difficult going forward. And I think COVID has really had an impact on that. But flip side, when you look at COVID, I think it's changed the way that we work. Like, look at the way that we're having this conversation now over Zoom. Look at the way that it's allowing families to be slightly more flexible, allowing people to have flexible working hours, allowing people to, communicate differently. The amount of time that's going to be saved on travel and, attending in-person conversations, etc. I think that's going to change things. I think there's still a real benefit of being around people in the office, but I don't know if you necessarily have to have that 9 to 5 days a week. So I think COVID has helped in terms of diverse individuals who are in the profession already, but it may have hindered the ability for those who are not yet in the profession to enter it.
Yeah,
I think one of the effects of COVID when it comes to just thinking about things at graduate level will be we have to think about also the economic effects of it, because as we see so many people suffering job losses, economic hardship, I think that will be potentially off-putting for a lot of students out there in terms of do I leave home, spend all the money that it costs to live elsewhere and go to university, or do I stay at home and go somewhere more locally? And might that cause some of those very talented people to go to places that firms just don't currently look at, and therefore, again, miss out on? So I think firms need to be mindful of casting the net a bit wider in order to make sure those people don't miss out. I mean, some of the grading point Toby mentioned, I mean, there's some helpful stuff that firms have started to use in terms of contextual data to see, you know, whether an individual's A-level results compared with their peers at their school, you know, shows outperformance, which can allow you to help account for, you know, how you might decide how they've performed or not. But then coming on to the workplace and once the people are in the firms and how the nature of our work is changing, one of my really big worries actually is about that lost ability to learn via osmosis that trainees at law firms have. And I think, you know, we're certainly getting the feedback from our trainees, missing out on hearing their supervisor, roommates, you know, involvement in a negotiation, on a client call, not being able to ask those very quick questions just when somebody's just there in front of you, and those little moments can accumulate over time and cause the quality of the training contract as it might otherwise be. So that's something I think firms again need to be alive to, and you know, bluntly, where somebody has perhaps come from a more diverse background and hasn't had that same leg up that people from other backgrounds have perhaps had through their life, they maybe need that bit more help, and so we need to be mindful of that, and we need to find solutions to that as a profession.
And if you guys were thinking about initiatives that you've seen or you've been involved in that you think have had and made a significant impact and could be replicated by, you know, your competitors or other organizations, what would you say that the ones that you've seen have been most effective have been?
I would say, so going back to attrition and going back to not having significant numbers in the upper echelons, one thing I know some law firms are considering doing, and I know we are doing, is having some reverse mentorship of the senior executives at the various different firms. So, you know, and that can be reverse mentorship from different types of diverse candidates, explaining what it's like for them on a day-to-day basis to work in the organisation, but also what it's like for them to be an individual in general society and having to deal with things day to day. And giving that sort of contextualisation to those senior individuals will give a better appreciation of what those individuals need to go through. And then when it comes to sponsorship and opportunities, hopefully, you know, those opportunities will be at the forefront of the minds of those senior people, and they will be offered to more diverse candidates to try and get them to come through the ranks and, you know, be in the upper echelons. And the other thing I've seen that, you know, some of the law firms are doing is essentially putting in targets. So by X number of days, we're going to have X number of people who are black, or X number of people who are women, or X number of people who identify with this sexual orientation. And I think quite crudely, I think that's required now. There's been so many platitudes over the years, and the numbers haven't really improved. So I think that in itself, hard data, hard targets, is really, really, really required.
I'd agree with that point around data, Toby, definitely. I think yeah, a lot of firms, including mine, have signed up to the race fairness commitment, which is intended to make sure that we're not just looking at you know, representation at the most senior levels, but looking at it entirely through the career path, and you know, beating yourself up about how you're performing at all levels is an important part of you know, improvement, because you see where the gaps are, and you try to understand why they arise. It's also interesting what you've said about reverse mentoring. We've embarked on our own program for the first time this year, which was designed in conjunction with Efwa Hirsch, the author and broadcaster, and certainly the feedback we're getting on that is fantastic. You know, we've got senior management, heads of all of the key departments in the firm involved in the program. It's particularly focused on ethnicity for us at the moment. And so they're all paired up with associates, junior associates, trainees across the firm. And part of it is to help them understand what that particular individual's experience happens to be. But part of it is also helping or encouraging people to engage with media, whether it be EFWA's own book, whether it be podcasts, all sorts of things that are out there that just help discussions get going and help offer a greater insight into different backgrounds and where people are coming from. And that's been received very well by senior figures. And I think a nice side effect of that hopefully will be creating those relationships between up and coming ethnic minority lawyers within the firm and senior management for their own individual benefit, as well as something for the greater good. The other thing that I would mention is just, and lots of firms have this, but query how they're being used. Our reach network for BME members of the firm and allies, it's a great forum for bringing people together and creating social events to allow people to realise that perhaps there are more of you than you realise in your organisation. But actually, the other way we're trying to work with the network is to create that forum for discussion around what it is that the firm has done, is doing, could do better, could do more of. And getting that feedback and delivering that back to management. So it's a great conduit for further discussions and hopefully further improvement.
Yeah, sorry, we've got something similar at Goldman. I sit on a firm-wide Black network, and since the whole Black Lives Matters situation arose, we've had some candid town halls with our senior managers. And the biggest thing that's come out of the back of that, and I actually spoke at one of those town halls about my own experiences, is the allyship. So it's the allyship that's come through from the organisation in general, where people are now prepared to have the conversations that used to be slightly more taboo and are interested in learning more about people and learning more about how they can assist. So I think that's another big thing that can help, the profession change. It's having allies, and that's across the whole of the diverse spectrum.
So if you were talking to a senior person, a partner in a law firm, an MD in a bank, how can they become allies for people in underrepresented groups? What sort of practical things can they do that would actually move them into the camp where they're helping?
So I think, Tom, there's a number of things that they can do. So they can educate themselves so they can understand the perspectives that other people have. They can be that sponsor in being a senior person, so when an opportunity comes up, they don't necessarily give it to the person that sits closest to them, but somebody who they may not have come across before, who hasn't been given that opportunity. They can encourage other people in the firm to attend events that are being put on by diverse groups to try and understand and gain knowledge. And quite frankly, they can offer themselves up to people and say, I want to know more. Can we sit down and have a coffee and have those frank discussions? And I think all of those things taken together are immensely important.
I'd absolutely agree. I think, engaging with people, giving up your time, not just sort of expressing sympathy, but actually acting on it is really important. Be mindful that the people you're trying to speak to and learn from are probably having lots of similar conversations with lots of well-intentioned people, which is great, but ultimately it imposes a disproportionate burden on your ethnic minority members of your organisation to have to deal with all of those multiple conversations, which is why I think Tobi's point around self-education is vitally important. Get out there, read Reni Eddo-Lodge, read F. Hirsch, read The Good Immigrant, and you'll pick up a lot of why there is a lot of angst out there as a consequence.
So if you guys were giving one piece of advice to a junior lawyer in your organizations who comes from an underrepresented group, that you think would have the most impact or be the best bit of advice, what would it be?
I think for me, it would be seek out opportunity and stretch yourself. You know, in some communities, in some diverse communities, people are slightly more reserved and don't necessarily are not that outgoing. But I think if you can seek out and use your network to find opportunities and take on a stretch assignment so you can showcase your abilities in the same way that your peers would do, I think that would be very, very good for your career, because it will show what you can offer and will also, you know, put you at the forefront of those conversations around promotion.
Yeah, from my perspective, you know, I'd say that realise and appreciate that, you know, there will be a lot of people out there at senior levels who are keen to see change happen, and tap into that. You know, find those influential people to offer their mentorship, who can support your progression. Be open to their feedback. But ultimately, those are the people that will help you, and they are there and keen to do so.
Perfect. Guys, thank you both so much. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. Before we move on, every guest on the General Counselling podcast is asked one question towards the end, which is, who is their GOAT lawyer? So for those unfamiliar with the sporting acronyms, GOAT is greatest of all time. And that can be someone who's real or fictional, alive or dead. So first, Toby, over to you. Who's your GOAT?
Yeah, mine, Tom, and it's come through a lot of reading this week or so on about her, has to be Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What a woman. The way that she looked to ensure that there was no discrimination that was in convention of the US Constitution and no gender discrimination. She might have been small in stature, but her legacy will live on forever, and the changes that she made, especially considering the majority voices she had to stand up against, to me is awe-inspiring. It
was a great article somewhere I read about her where she got a job as long as she just had to promise not to wear trousers to work, which made me...
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading up, and you know, when she was going to Harvard Law School, the professor asked her, how can you justify taking a place from a well-qualified man? Just imagine having to go through that.
I mean, but that's a great shout. One of the guests last week was hovering on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it was just before she died, and he texted me afterwards saying he was absolutely mortified that he went with someone else. So I'm glad she came up this week. Jat, how about you?
I'm going to take a slightly different tack. I'm going to offer up Vincent Gambini from the movie My Cousin Vinny, who, if you recall, he had a bit of a rough start. He thought he could just wing it, but actually realised that's not possible. You saw him work hard at his craft. He had to fly by the seat of his pants a little bit. Maybe he had a bit of luck, but ultimately that hard work paid off, and ultimately he was very successul.
When you said that, I remembered Joe Pesci, and I was thinking, I didn't think the guy from Casino was a lawyer, but then I'm glad it was my cousin Vinny rather than that guy. Gents, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for giving up the time for the podcast today. It's been an absolutely brilliant conversation, some really, really interesting stuff, and some great content that I think our network will be super interested in. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for listening. As I say, if you like what you hear, click subscribe, or you can follow us via the Montresor Legal LinkedIn page. Thank you very much.